Hello and welcome everybody, this is Roland Hartmann from graphicinmotion.com and it is tutorial time again. In this tutorial I will show you how to create a really cool digital city, and I will also show you how you can create a seamless looping animation flying through this city. So let's jump right into After Effects and let's get started. If you do not have the Stardust plugin already, I would recommend that you jump over to the superluminal.tv website and get it there. You can also download a free trial version. In After Effects, first of all, let's create a new composition, and in my case I will just use this HDTV 1080 preset, and I will make sure that I make it 125 frames long, and I will call it Digital City. And now let's create a new layer by pressing Ctrl Y, and let's name this Stardust. And I will apply the Stardust effect to this layer. And now we have some particles here. Okay, great. So the next step is to create a layout for our city. And to do that, I will create a new composition. And I will make this 2000 times 2000 pixels. And I will just call this my city layout. And inside this new composition, let's create a new layer. Make sure that it's comp size, and I can also call this city layout. And on this layer, actually, I want to change the color here to something like that. Okay, and I also want to make sure that my grid is turned on, show grid and snap to grid. If your grid looks different than mine, then this has to do with the preferences right here. You see right here, you can set up your grid, you can set up colors, and you can also set up the size of your grid. Now I will use this grid to create kind of a map of my city, and therefore I will use masks, because later on in our digital city composition we will use these masks to emit particles using Stardust, and we will use these masks to create our buildings actually. So first of all, what I want to do is I want to specify my road in the middle. And to do that, I just select this layer and I select a rectangle mask tool. And then let me take a look what we can do here. So make sure that you leave enough room for your road so that it is big enough. Let's say maybe like this here. This could work. Okay, let's make sure that this is in the middle, which it is not. So I will quickly change this. Like so. And I will just make sure that inside this area I will not build any buildings. So the next step is to create simple buildings. And I can do it like that. First of all, create just a simple rectangle like so. Okay, I've got my first building here. So let's create another one right beside it. Okay. Now let's come in here. Let's make some small buildings right here. Maybe something like that. And maybe another one right here. And now I will choose my pen tool and I will create a more interesting building shape and a little bit of a bigger building. So let's say maybe right here. Let's create something like this. And always make sure that these edges are really linear edges. So to change that, you can hold down Alt and click on the edge, and then we drag it on the point in our grid. And you see what I do here. So this is a simple outline of my building. And this is how you can fill up or how you can create the map of your building. I would recommend that you do not create too many buildings and do not make it too dense, because then it gets a little bit crazy with this digital setup. So I will continue creating the layout for my city and I will be back when it's finished. Okay, so now my city layout is finished and you see what I did. I just created a few different shapes and just created, something like a map. So we are more or less looking at our city from the top. And now I want to group these masks into 3 different kind of buildings. I want to create skyscrapers, so really tall buildings, then some kind of middle buildings and smaller buildings. And to do that, we need to group these masks on separate layers so that we can use these layers later on as emitter layers in Stardust. So let's do that. First of all, I want to create and specify my skyscrapers, and therefore I just select the masks that I want to be skyscrapers. And I want this one to be a really big one, really big building. So this is mask number 13 here. Then I want this one to be a skyscraper. And let's say I want this one to be a skyscraper. So let's take these 3 on this side. And right over here, I will take, let's say, this one here, this one, and this one. So these will be my 6 buildings that will be really tall. And now you see I have all these masks selected right here. Now I can colorize them and choose one color so that I know these are my skyscrapers. And actually I also can bring them just on top here, or let's say just beneath my road mask. And so I know, okay, these are my skyscrapers. And now I will just copy them to a new layer. So just create a new layer and call these skyscrapers. And now we will just copy these masks over here, Control C, Control V. Okay, perfect. And I can turn this off for now. Okay, now let's take the next set of masks. So the next one will be my middle buildings. And I will choose this mask here and hold down Shift and choose this mask, and let's say this one and this one. Okay, so let's take a look. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's good. Colorize them green. And now copy these over, create a new layer, call it mid buildings, and paste the masks in here. Okay, perfect. And now I will just select the other masks, and these will be my small buildings. You can always come in here later and change the layout of your city, but it's good to spend a little bit of time in the beginning. So let's copy these masks, or let's colorize them first of all. Another color. And now copy them, create a new layer. And these are my small buildings. And I paste them in here. Okay, so now I've got all my buildings set up, and that's really good. Let me quickly just group these as well. Or they're already grouped. Okay, so I have one mask that I didn't specify. I forgot this, and I will just add this to the small buildings. So let's just make this green and just copy it over to my small buildings layer. Mask number 22, copy it over right here. Okay, perfect. Now I will just grab all these layers and copy them over into my digital city composition, and I will drag them beneath my Stardust layer. And now let's make sure that they sit in the right position, and therefore I just have to put in 960 times 540. Now they're exactly in the middle of our comp. And now let's make all of these 3D and rotate them by -90 degrees on the x-axis. Okay, perfect. Now we can build our first set of buildings, and therefore let me change this quickly to a custom view, then I can see what I'm doing. And you see here I have my city layout already. And now I want to start to build my skyscraper. So let's choose the Stardust layer, and with this emitter that's already there, I can now change the type, the emitter type, from point to text or mask. And now I can specify a mask. And now I can specify a layer right here in the layer properties, and therefore I will take my skyscrapers. And then I can specify some path properties. And you see what we've got now. Now particles are emitting from this path, but they are from the mask, I should say, but they are now traveling around, and I do not want this. So let's set the speed here to 0, and let's also set the size of the emitter to 1. And let's take a look what it does now. Now it's emitting inside my mask. And this is because we have text mask emit type set to volume. And if we want it to be a weighted edge, so let's choose edge weighted. And now you see what we have got here. And one more important thing, I do not want them to emit all the time. I only want them to emit once. So let's just change the emitting type here to once. And let's make sure that our particles are alive through the whole animation. So let's set this to 5 seconds. And now you see we have got our particles here. And with my path subdivide, I can now change the density of these particles. So if you come in here a little bit closer, let's set this to 15 for now. I will make the particles way smaller. So let's take a look here, particle properties, and maybe make these 4 for now. Looks quite good. Probably I can set this down to 10. Okay, so for now this looks good to me. Now it's time to give our buildings some height, and therefore we will just use a replica node. So let's add a replica node and let's link it with our particles. And inside this replica node, we'll now apply some offset on the y-axis. So let's set this to 20 for now. And let's start replicating. And you see that I chose the wrong direction. So let's just change the offset to -20. And now you see we get some buildings going here. And because these are skyscrapers, we'll make them rather large here. So maybe as a good starting point, let's go with 30, 35 here. Looks quite good. And we could also make these a little bit more interesting by adding a bit of random offsets here. And you can go to the replica node right on the bottom. There is this option to random properties. First of all, you can change, for example, the particle scale. This randomizes the particle scale a little bit, and this looks quite good because then it looks a little bit more interesting. You could do the same with the opacity, and you can of course also do the same with the replicate chance. You see, you could also use this to create some nice build-up animations or whatever. But actually, I do not want the replicate chance to be random. I just want this to be 0, but I will add a little bit of randomness in the particle scale and in the opacity. Okay, this looks quite good. Now let's add some color to these particles. And to colorize them, I will use a field node. So let's add a field node and let's link this to our replica. Now we choose this field node and we change it from field type to maps because I want this to be a color map. Now we will use type color and we will change the size to a size X, Y, and Z because then I can specify the size. And now let's project this on the Y-axis. And let's make sure that effect is of course set to color. And now we see that it's already having an effect on our buildings, but it's not set up right here. So let me apply this to the field properties. And now we can make this a little bit bigger. And you see if I make it bigger, then more of the gray values come in here at the bottom, but I also can shift it in position. And if I shift it up here, now you see that my gradient is mapping fully over my buildings from bottom to top now. And now we can specify some colors. So let's change this to something like maybe interesting colors. We start off with, or actually this is the top of my building. So I will make this a little bit darker. Okay. And now let's take this color over, but make it brighter on the bottom like so. And I think this looks quite good for now. Okay, so my first set of buildings looks quite nice. Another thing you can do is you can, of course, use custom particles. Let me show you this quickly. Let's create a new composition. Make sure that this composition is only 100 by 100 pixels big. And these are my particles. And I just need 2 frames here actually, because I will just create 2 different particles. So I create a new layer, and this will be make it comp size, and this will be fully white. Okay, so let's change the opacity here to 25%. And now let's create some digits here. Therefore I take my text tool and I put in 1. Make sure that this is aligned in the middle here. And make sure that this is only 1 frame long. So let's make it smaller here or shorter. Actually, I think there's something wrong with the duration of my composition. Yeah, it's only 1 frame long, but I wanted it to be 2 frames long. Okay, now this works. Now I will just make sure that my white solid is covering the whole composition and that this one is only 1 frame long. Now duplicate this and shift it over and now change this one here to a 0. And this will be just a binary code particle. And if you watched maybe my digital intro tutorial, also Stardust tutorial, then you are already familiar how to build these custom particles. So let's go back to my digital city composition and let's bring in our particles comp, drag it on bottom here, make it invisible. And within my Stardust layer and within my particle node here, I can now change this from circle to a texture. Now let's specify the texture right here and I can choose my particles. And now I will use not current time, but random still frame. And now you see they are quite small, so I have to add a little bit of size here, maybe double the size to 8 and even 10 maybe, like so. And what I can do now is I can go to my replica field and there is this option to offset the texture. Right now it's set to none, but if I set it to random, then you will see that this randomizes the texture over my replicates. And that makes sense in this case if we are using this kind of a digital binary code particles. But you see that we lost the colors now, and this is because of the setting of the texture, and there is this texture color use, and if this is set to default, it will just use the colors that are specified in your texture. So here it's white and gray or transparent. But if you change this from particles, here I am, from default to alpha, then you see immediately that our field node again takes over the control and colorizes our particles. Okay, so this is it with our first building. So you see how this works. It's not that complicated to create really nice buildings. What you also can do, one more hint, choose the emitter, and there is this option in the path properties to speed a long path so that the particles move along a path. And if we set this to maybe not a too high value, but maybe 10, and now we take a look here and create a quick round preview, you will see what this does. And you see now the particles are rotating, and you can do this with one set of your buildings, and this can have quite a nice effect. So maybe let's rotate our particles on our skyscrapers for now. Okay, and to create another set of buildings, it's pretty simple. What we can do now is just duplicate this tree here. So just select all of these nodes here, press Ctrl and D and create a duplicate. And now you only have to go to the emitter, to the new one, so emitter number 2, and just change the layer here. And let's say we continue with our mid buildings here. And you see immediately now we created another set of buildings. Now if I go to my replica node and just change the size here, so make these smaller, maybe like 20, and maybe also change the offset a bit so that they look a little bit different, so -15, and yeah, like so, that looks quite good. Now they are a little bit denser than the others. Now we can go into the particles and change these. So let's say we do not want to have textures here. Maybe we want to have rectangles, and can move in here now and change this size a bit. So maybe I want these to be smaller on the X, or maybe let's make it like 6 and 12. Could look quite good. And you see now we created another set of particles. I can now come in here into my field and create new colors. So let's open up the maps here and let's open up the color over length and let's create a new color, maybe something like that. And something like that. And we can change the field a bit because of course this is now a little bit smaller. So let's set this to 250 and bring it down a bit. Or actually I have to bring it up, the value up, like so. And you see this looks quite good. And of course now these are also rotating. Actually I do not want this. So I will go to my second emitter here and I can set the path properties here, the speed along path to 0 again. Okay, so now I created another set of buildings. So let's create one more, and we'll just move over here a bit. So let's select the last tree node here, Control D, and now change the layer in the emitter number 3 to my small buildings. Let's move on to my replica node. Let's make these small, like 10. I mean, minus 15, maybe change these to minus 18 just to get a bit of variation. Okay, looks quite good. And of course, now let's change the particles. And in this case, maybe we just want to leave circles. Take a quick look here. Doesn't look too bad. I think they're a little bit too big, so let's set them to 4. And we can also just change the weight or the subdivide of the path here in our emitter settings. So let's just increase this, or actually, yeah, decrease this, so that we get a little bit of a denser particles here. So maybe to 6. Looks quite good. Okay. And now let's go to our field and let's change the colors here. Maybe to something like blue. And now make sure that our field is in the right position. So let's take a look here. And I think that this looks quite good. Okay, so now you see I created a nice city layout. And if I change my view now to active camera, you see what we have got here. And now it's time to create a camera actually. So let's go to our layer and let's create a new camera. And I want this to be quite a wide angle camera. We can use this 50mm for now. Let's take a look what this does. And now let's create another null object that will just be my cam control. So create a new null object, make it 3D and link the camera to it. I can call this cam control, and I always like to colorize these in the same way so that I know these belong together. And now I can change the position here of my null. So maybe just move it up a little bit, not too much. I want this to travel along my road here. And now I can choose my camera and rotate this on the x-axis, maybe minus 10. It was the wrong direction, so 10 plus 10, like so. That doesn't look too bad. And what we can do now is we can make my guide layers here invisible. So select all these layers, the city layers and the masks here, and just make them invisible. And now you see we already have a nice city setup. So the next step is to really fill out our screen. So if I go back to my custom view, you see we only have one block here, but we can of course now duplicate this and create a really nice city area here. And to do that, we will again use a replica node. So let's add a replica node here. And let's put it right down here. And let's link all my trees here, my building trees, to my replica node. And now I created a replicate of all my buildings, and now I can shift this. So let's come in here. Let's make sure that we choose to create 2 replicates, because I want to create 2 actually. And let's offset on the z-axis, and we will offset it for 2000. And if you see what this is doing, now I'm shifting these, and because I know that my city layout is exactly, my first block here is exactly 2000 times 2000 pixels wide, I can now just put in here 2000. And now I know that this will repeat in the same distance on the z-axis. And this is exactly what I need to create this nice looping animation that I will create now in the next step. But we can make this even more interesting. Now with our replicate, we can now add a clone, and therefore we use a clone. Let me put this right here and create a clone of this whole thing here, so of this replica. And now let's add a transform node to shift this. So let's link the transform node to our clone, come in here, and now with our transform node, I can change the position on X, and now I can change this to plus 2000, sorry. And you see what this does. This now shifts this whole street here, my first street with the buildings over. And to get in even a bit more variation, what I can do now is I can just change the scale on the set, for example, instead of 100 to -100. And you see now it will just turn it around. So we get a bit more variation here in our city setup. And to add even more variation here, I can change the scale on Y to maybe something like 60. And you see now the buildings are just a little bit smaller. And yeah, this can help to sell this effect. And another option is that it doesn't get too crazy. We can decrease the particle opacity, maybe also something like 60. Okay, now let's duplicate this here. So the clone and the transform, but make sure to just turn it off before you do it, because otherwise when I duplicate this now, it's not linked to anything, it will duplicate or create a clone of everything. And this can sometimes, depending on your system, can lead to a crash. So make sure, turn off the clone and then duplicate it. And now let's link it again. And now we can activate it again. So activate the two clones here. And let's go to the transform here and just change, instead of 2000, we will now set this to -2000, and that's it. And now we have another set of our buildings right here. And I can maybe change this here even further and to create more variation and set this to 50. Okay, perfect. Now let's change back to our active camera, and you see what we've got here. Now we already have a really nice buildings or a really nice city setup. I forgot one essential thing. Actually, I don't know why, but I always forget this. The particles have this transfer mode, and of course we want to set it to something more interesting. We are creating a digital city, so let's set it to add or to screen. This is really up to you, and you see immediately that we get a way nicer look here. So let's make this change here. Okay, this looks pretty good. Now it's time to create our animation. And I want to have a looping animation. So how can we do this? First of all, let's go to our camera. I think that the rotation doesn't work like this. I want to rotate it a bit more, maybe 15 degrees. I think this looks a little bit better. And now you see, if I move to frame number 0 in my animation, everything disappears. And this is because Stardust requires one frame to create all these particles. So just move in one frame, and then by pressing B on your keyboard, set the in point of our work area just to this frame here. Now let's create a keyframe on the position of the camera. Actually, what we can do is we can separate these dimensions here, because I do not need X and Y. I just want to animate my set position. So let's just create a keyframe right here with a value of -800. And let's move our camera forward for 2000 pixels. So let's set this to +1000, 2000, and this is 1200. And you see what this did. So if I go back now to my frame here by pressing J on my keyboard, you see that actually we have exactly the same image here. The only thing that changes is the background right here. So if I go forward, you see the position of the camera inside the city is the same, only the background changed. So if I play this now, it will not loop, of course, because we have this jump here. But I can compensate this by changing the visibility of my particles. And therefore I can go to Stardust and I can go to my render settings. And inside the render settings, we have this option of the clipping. And now I just have to change the maximum distance and the maximum fade. So what I will do here is now I will change quickly back to my custom view. And I will zoom out a bit here to explain this a bit better. And actually we have a small problem here because my clones are not in the right position. Just realized that. So why is that? Let me take a look. This must be a problem of the transform. So if I shift this back, yeah, I think this is it. So let's shift this back -4000. Let me see. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so we just have to change the transform here on the set position to -4000, and then we have exactly what I want. Okay, like so. So if we take a look here, what my camera does, this is the small yellow box here. It's moving through my city, and I was just changing the clipping settings here. So now I have to change the clipping of the Stardust particles. I'm moving forward for 2000, right from this point to this point, right around here. So we can take a look here. My camera, take a look at the box, is moving from here to here. And I want to make sure that in the beginning, I do not see this last part here of the city. So I can just limit the visibility of the particles to a range of 2 blocks. And our block is 2000 times 2000, so we can just change this to 4000. Let's take a look here. I will put in here 4000. And now I will put in here 2000. And now everything is gone because my camera here in the custom view is too far away. But if I go to my active camera, you will see that my city appears again. And if I did not calculate wrong, then it should work now to create a nice looping animation. So I will just create a quick RAM preview to check whether this worked, and I will lower the resolution here a bit so that it calculates a bit faster. So let's take a look whether it works. So the RAM preview is finished, and let's take a look whether it really loops nicely. And you see it does. The only thing that jumps are the moving particles on my building. So if you do not want to have any jumps in here, then you should make sure that the rotation of these particles lasts exactly as long as your camera move, or you can of course also just turn off the rotation of the particles around the masks. To create a really seamless loop, I just have to shift this last keyframe for 1 frame. And now I have my perfect seamless loop. So, okay, this is how you can loop very complex setups by using a traveling camera and by creating clones on your camera traveling axis. Now let's make this even a bit more interesting. So first of all, we can add a bit more digital stuff here. And again, if you watched my tutorial about the digital globe, this Earth-like thing with this nice digital grid, then you are familiar with the techniques that I use here. So I will make this rather quick now, and I will just add a little bit more interesting stuff to this city. And to do that, we will again just go to our Stardust layer, and we will add another emitter here. So let's create a new emitter, and let's create a new set of particles. Actually, what we can do here is we can duplicate this set of particles because I want to use the same particles here. So I just duplicate the particles from my first building and link them to my new emitter. Now with this emitter, I will set my type to grid. I want to create a grid here. Again, I will set the speed to 0. And now let's make sure that the size of the grid here is a bit bigger. So I want it on X to be 1000, on Y to be 1000, and on Z to be 1000. Okay. And you see what we have got here. Now let's move to the beginning of our animation. Now you see my grid here. Actually, I can move it up a bit so that I'm traveling through this grid nicely. Take a look, like so. That looks quite good. And I think I have too many particles here, so I do not want so many. So maybe let's set this to 5 times 5 times 5. Or maybe, yeah, I think this is okay. And now let's add a replica here. And this time we will use the replica in a different way. This time I just want to create some nice grids here, and therefore I can use the corners effect, and I really love this. So this is probably my favorite effect in Stardust. So let's increase the replicas here to something like 10 for now. And let's increase the offset to something like 10 as well. Let's see what this does. And this already creates a small grid, so I definitely have to increase this here. So let's see, 40 replicates, and maybe set this to 20. Gets more interesting. Okay. Now let's make sure that I change, but I think it's still a little bit too dense. So I will go into my emitter settings and reduce the number of particles here. So let's say 4 on the X, 4 on the Y, and 4 on Z. And this looks a little bit better. So now let's make sure that this looks a little bit more interesting, and I will go to my particles and they are too big here, so I will reduce the size. And now I can go to my replica and add a little bit of randomness again. So let's make the density maybe a bit higher, 200, like so. This looks quite cool. Now let's go to our random properties. First of all, make sure that we offset the texture randomly. That's important. And now let's make sure to add a bit of random particle scale, maybe 40. Let's take a look here. Oh, increase this to 60 even. And also the particle opacity to 40 makes it even more interesting. Now I can go back to my particles because now they're a little bit small. So get back a bit of size here, like so. And now let's apply some color here. And I can do this simply by applying a random color from a gradient. So let's go to my particles here, and now let's choose the color gradient. And now I will just feature a few colors that I've got in my scene already. So I will take this purple color here, then I will add another color, and I will feature this green here. And I also got some blues in here, so let's feature this as well if I can get it. It's back here, okay. And let's make these a little bit brighter. Okay. And now you see I've got already a quite nice looking grid. And if I link my grid now to my replica, you will see what happens. Now it's replicated and now it fills the whole city. Okay, so this is more or less how I created the city, how I created the grid to make it really look awesome. You can add some glows. And one more thing that I want to show you. If you remember the example that I showed you, there was some kind of a reflection going on, and I want to show you how to create this reflection quickly. So let's just choose my Stardust layer and let's create a duplicate by pressing Ctrl and D. And now the lower one here, I will just rename to Stardust and Shadow. And now let's select this layer and make sure that my tree here is Stardust Shadow. Okay, this is good. Now we can just delete our grid that I just created because I do not need this. And I also want to delete my clones because I also do not need the clones. I only want my shadows to be visible right here. So right in the main street, we can say. And to create a shadow now, I only have to add a transform node and link it to my replica. And now I will just change the scale on Y from 100 to -100, and you will see what's happening now. And now I just duplicated more or less, or I just mirrored the whole thing on the Y axis. And now with this layer here, so let's collapse this Stardust Shadow layer. I can first of all change the opacity to something low like 40. And now you see we have again, or we have already, a very nice and clean looking reflection. And now of course you can add some blur. So maybe just a directional blur or whatever you want. Add a directional blur to the shadow. And let's take a look. Maybe set this to 5. And now you see we have a really nice looking and very complex looking city with a very nice reflection. Okay, so as a last step in this tutorial, I will add a new adjustment layer. I will just add a little bit of glow to this because glow is always cool when working with particles and with digital particles. So let's add a glow to the adjustment layer. And this doesn't look good as it is. So let's increase the radius here to something like maybe 150. And you could also put in 2 or 3 instances of glow. You can change the glow operation mode maybe to screen, then it's not that harsh. You can play around here, create your own look. So make sure that you have maybe set this to 16 or 32 bits when working with glows, then you get better results. And we can also change the threshold maybe to something like 45, that also the dark things here glow. Now it's a little bit hard, maybe -7. But you see, you can create a nice glowy look for your particles. And now let's create a final ramp preview of our animation here. And while creating this ramp preview, I just realized that I forgot one important thing. So let me quickly tell you this. On the Stardust layer, on our city layer, the grid that I created, you have to set the emitter to once. It was set to default, and if it's set to default, then it will emit particles throughout the whole animation, which of course will destroy our looping ability of this setup. So make sure that just in the grid emitter right here, you set the emitting to once, and then it will loop. And now I can render the ramp preview to show you the result. Okay, so the ramp preview is finished, and you see that the looping works great, and it only lasted a few minutes to render. So Stardust is really awesome when it comes to this very heavy and very complex particle setups. So this is it with this tutorial. I hope that you liked it. I hope that you learned something. Now it's up to you to create awesome digital cities. If you have any questions, then please feel free to post them in the comments. If you want to watch more awesome tutorials, I would recommend that you check out my website, which is www.graphicInmotion.com. There you can find some really nice After Effects templates, and you can of course find all my After Effects tutorials. We have a bunch of Stardust tutorials right here, but of course also other tutorials. And there is also an After Effects basic course, free After Effects basic course for all beginners out there. So thank you very much for watching, and I really hope to see you soon. Goodbye.